What's up YouTube? Welcome back to Homebrew Subaru. In this episode I'm going to attempt to rebuild some seized brake calipers. What's up everyone? So like I mentioned in 2 videos ago, the Impreza's got some pretty bad brakes on it right now, and I've got these WRX 2-piston calipers that I took off of a car because one of them was seizing on, and I kind of held on to them with the idea that I would rebuild them and put them onto something, and now I've got the idea I'll put them onto this car. So I've had the rebuild kits for quite some time, and I've just never bothered getting around to trying to rebuild them because I've never needed them, and at this point I do. So they're on the bench. They are heavily corroded. It started out with just one piston being seized, and now I notice there's a second piston seized at least. They are just 2-piston calipers. They're not 4-piston WRX calipers, so they're a little bit more stopping power. They're not going to be a dramatic difference, but they are going to allow me to use a bigger rotor and WRX brakes in the front basically. So I've already got brakes on order for the car, and I need to get the calipers working if I'm going to use them. If I'm not, then I'm going to have to buy some calipers, and they're quite expensive. I kind of want to get around the idea of buying them because it's probably going to be like $400 or $500 out of my pocket to get them. Anyway, so yeah, I've got everything on the bench, and let's see what we got. So although it's quite a nice day out there, it was pretty chill out this morning, so I ended up starting up my heat for the first time in the garage and just have it on low so it's nice and warm. As you can see, the calipers are in heavily corroded shape. I've already taken 3 of the boots off so I could start putting some penetrating fluid in around these pistons, and before you start, pretty much the night before, that's what you want to do. You kind of want to soak in there and just let it sit, and eventually I'll be spraying some more. I left this boot on so I can kind of show you how it comes off, but before you get into this job, you're going to want to let some penetrating fluid sit on these and let it try and seep down in there. It alone could break the piston free and allow it to spin out, but I've got some more tricks that we're gonna have to try maybe. So there really isn't much to these rebuild kits. Kind of tore one open already just to make sure I've got kind of what I'm looking for, but there is the seals that go directly on the actual pistons, and then you get the new boots to the dust boots and a little locking ring to kind of lock them in place. I hope these are the right kits. I bought them quite some time ago, but as far as I know, they're ordered for these calipers. And then some new pins and just the rubber bushings. So we got new slider pins and caliper bolts. And then this actually has the dust boots for the sliders and the little rubber dampeners that always kind of swell out and tear up and jam the thing. So you get some new ones of those. There is no bleeders, but the bleeder screws on these actually don't look too bad, and I think I should be able to get them out without too much problem. And even the outside of the calipers aren't too bad. It's just a lot of the inside where the pad really got hot and started leaving some gunk everywhere. And the pistons, of course, are quite rusty, so they're going to have to be wire wheeled as well. So I'm going to set up the camera, and we are going to try and get all the pistons out to start. So first I'm going to get these old slider pins out. They're just 14s, and a quick zap with the gun should take them right off. And because really I'm replacing all this, I can just kind of junk these. I've probably got fairly clean extras anyway. Next, you would go ahead and take out these boots. You can see how soft they are. I mean, it just kind of tears out of there. And take your pick and just kind of walk it around the piston and you can tear most of the old boot out of there. And what this does, it just allows you to get the penetrating fluid down and along the piston a lot easier. And I don't know if the camera can see it very well, but you can see how the boot's really wrinkled on this one because I've applied penetrating fluid to it already. And I know this piston was moving, so got the boot out of both of them, and I'll apply some more penetrating fluid in there. And just let that sit for a few minutes. Now that the penetrating fluid's kind of seeped in there a little bit, I've got it all the caliper all fastened in the vise, relatively tight, not enough to crush the thing, but it's in there tight that it shouldn't move. And I get out my trusty channel locks, and I will grab firmly a hold of the piston. You don't want to start slipping when you're doing this, and just start rocking it back and forth. Now this was the piston that was moving earlier, so we're just working it around, letting some more of that penetrating fluid get down in behind it. And while you're doing this, you can slowly try and start pulling upward. If the caliper comes loose like it is, you're just going to have to tighten it up a little bit more. It's really the turning motion that's going to help this thing come out. And eventually the piston will pop out. Now looking down in behind here, it's a pretty horrible mess. If you look down in the bottom of that caliper, there is all types of gunk. So the piston that wasn't seized was still quite firm coming out. I'm hoping this one I can get it to turn. That's half the battle right there, getting it to turn. It's trying to come out. It's definitely in there, and this is really tough to hold on to and pull up at the same time. Now another way that this can be done, it makes it a little easier if you have a second person and some air, compressed air. If this piston is still in place and you put a block of wood in here, then you put some air pressure to the port that the brake fluid goes into. It'll be pushing up on the pistons, and the block of wood will prevent them from firing out if they're already loose. But if you've got a seized one, turning it with that air pressure pushing on the bottom of the piston can really help break it free and push it out for you. Oh, there we go. Man, oh man. Now that we have both pistons actually out of there, we can go ahead and remove what's left of the boot and the actual seal that seals the brake fluid in behind the piston. And that should just literally fold right out of there quite easily. Now the seals weren't leaking, but at least it came out in one piece and it doesn't look too swollen, so I should be able to compare it to the new one to make sure I've got the right seals to go back in. Now the little retaining spring that actually holds what's left of the dust boot in there can be very difficult to get out. Just finding the end of it so that you can kind of hook onto it is sometimes next to impossible. So just try and get more of the boot out of your way if possible. There. Now the actual retainer's out of the way. The seal, or the boot, should just literally fall in and kind of come out of there. Wow. So now the seal and the boot retainer are all out of there. There's a lot of rust buildup here. There's a lot of gunk inside the bottom of the caliper. It needs a major cleanup. And both of them are probably going to be the exact same way. So I am going to go ahead and go about taking this seal and this boot. I will start to work on the other caliper and get the pistons out of it, get it to the point where it's like this one. And then I'm probably going to go straight into cleaning and trying to get some of the rust off of them, and we'll come back. Hopefully they'll be clean. Now it's been a couple of hours. I've spent a lot of time trying to clean these parts. The rust buildup was just really thick, and all I really have is a wire wheel or a wire brush on an angle grinder. These are as clean as I'm going to get them. I realize there is little spots of rust that I cannot get, and they are going to corrode over time, but I can only do what I can do, and really I just want good working calipers. If they start to corrode again and I have to paint them up a second time later on, I will. But so basically I just wire wheeled everything, and then down into these grooves where the boot actually goes, just scraped all the rust out of there as best as I could with various tools, and then took just the brush to loosen up everything, constantly washing with brake clean to make sure everything's as clean as possible. So I mean, even the bottom bore, let's get the light on here, even the bottom bore in there is not too bad. Probably using these for a little while and then doing a brake flush wouldn't be too bad of an idea. The pistons, all I really did with them is just use some really light emery and just oxidized cloth, and just get them smooth. Nothing to take off anything, just to take off some of the buildup that was on them, because they are relatively clean other than the insides are still rotten. But I tried to wire brush as best I could in there. As long as they're clean going in and there's nothing on the actual surface, they should be good to use. So I'm preparing to get the seals installed, and I'll kind of show you how the boots get installed with the clips, because they're a little tricky. And then once everything's all together, basically just brake clean everything and then let it sit and dry, and then I'm going to have to paint them. Okay, I'm working a little close to the camera here, so I might end up knocking into it. But while we're doing this, we want a little brake fluid. I'm just going to get the seals covered in brake fluid, and brake fluid burns, cuts. I'm just reminding myself now. But we have the seals, and we're just going to try and slip the seal right into the groove, kind of holding it with my other thumb, and it'll probably get to a point where it wants to bind or roll, but just keep as many fingers on it as possible and get it shoved into the groove. And it might let's get the light on here again. It might try and roll a little bit, And as long as you're gentle with the pick, you don't want to be stabbing the seal, especially on the sealing surface, but just kind of easing it into the groove a little bit. And usually it starts to fall in, and then you can just kind of take your thumb and roll it in the rest of the way. They can be tricky, but just be patient and they will go in. Make sure they're fully seated. Take your finger and put them all the way around just to make sure. And now we can take just a tiny little extra brake fluid just to lubricate the seals and the actual bore a little bit. So now we're ready to try and install the piston. We want to get the dust boot onto the piston as we're installing, because the dust boot and the clip will be very difficult to install afterwards. So again, we're going to take a little bit more brake fluid. And just slop it all over the pistons. And just a little bit on the actual boot. And then I go from the top, just slip the boot over the first portion of the piston, and then grabbing hold of the entire thing, pull it down really firmly on one side, and then trap it so it can't come off, and then just go on the other side and continue pulling down, and then you can just kind of walk around the rest of it. It's not very easy. I might make it look a little easy, but as long as you don't let it slip off, it will go on. And once it's on in place, we can kind of just try this again. And if you're not pulling it the right way, I suppose it could get torn. Now we want to gently and slowly pull the one end down, so we don't want it pulling off all the way. You can put it on just a little bit more, just so you have it just about something like that. And this is the actual groove, or the lip that will seat into the groove, and the retaining ring goes in behind that, so it kind of drops in between this little area right here. So first, just take the boot, kind of drop it down into the groove, and then just slowly kind of push in the rest of it. It should go in rather easily, and then give it a little turn just to make sure it is in all the way around. So next is the retaining ring. These can be a little bit intimidating, but they're not too bad to get in. Basically what we're going to do is start in this open end and have it seat into the groove, and then as we push on the right side of it, these two ends will begin to collapse together, and then once that happens, you can just push this end in and it should snap into place. It's not the easiest thing. It might take me a try or two, and you don't really want to be pulling on the piston here, because the piston could just directly pull right out of the boot. But it looks like I've got the clip kind of started into place. And using the dull end of my pick, I'm just kind of putting some pressure down on the clip. To make sure it snaps into place, and once it does, it'll firmly hold the boot in. And now at this point, we can slowly guide this piston down into the bore. It'll be a little resistant, but it should pretty much go in with hand pressure. Something like that. and probably get it to go down all the rest of the way using the C-clamp at this point, just because it's getting a little bit tight in the bore. But we can check all the movement after we're finished. So we'll put together the other side, and then we're going to test the caliper. So I have both pistons in, and I was actually able to push both of them to this point by hand, so that's a good sign. Pushing them by hand is not something normally you can do with fluid in there because it's all hydraulic pressure, but they moved really nicely, and now we can actuate them to see how well this thing works. And how I do that, I'll take a block of wood and just kind of sit it in between the actual pad holder and the pistons. And then if you have some shop air pressure, and with a rubber nipple on it at the end like that, you can put that directly to the port where the line goes and just give it some shop air pressure. And you want to see them both fire out just like that, and you can see they're holding right onto that block of wood. But you want to make sure that they push back nice and easily by hand, and that works nice, very nice. And that's ready to clean and paint. So here is the final product. I gave them some more cleaning, cleaned out the bores of the caliper brackets, and hit everything with high temperature paint. Got all my new sliders lubed up and installed with their dust boots. Got the bleeders taken out, cleaned up, put back in. And they are not perfect, but they're going to do the job. So I am really glad the way these things turned out. They cleaned up relatively well, and getting the rebuild kits into them has saved me a small fortune. I priced these out locally, and my costs are $150 a side. At the dealer, I'm sure they probably cost more, but locally they were unavailable anyway, and I'd have to do almost like a back order on them or a special order. They can be a little bit intimidating to build. So if you haven't done it before and you've got something that's heavily corroded like these ones were, you will probably be better off just taking that caliper in and trading it in as a core against a reman. I was able to do these in relatively good time, and that's just basically me paying myself to build my own stuff. It saves me some cash money for the time that I spent, but you know, that's kind of the point of this. I want to try and keep it as cheap as possible. These WRX calipers will allow me to move up to the 11.5-inch rotor in the front, and that's going to give me some quite improved stopping power, especially if I do some cross-drilled stuff. They'll be able to take a lot of heat, and that's kind of what I'm looking for this car. I want to jump on the brakes and get the brakes upgraded first before I start adding some power and some suspension mods. But as you can see, it's relatively easy to change the seals in the actual pistons. So if you just have calipers that have a leaking seal, you might be better off, especially if you have like 4 pots, to just buy a seal kit and try and change out the seals and pistons yourself. The pistons are available. It's not something I knew I was going to have to go with, so I just decided not to and risk it, and I got away with it. So if you like this video, definitely give it a thumbs up, and if you're new here and you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button for me. Leave your questions and comments further down below, and I'll see you in the next one.